My name is Raymond, and I've always believed that loyalty should be a two-way street. For 3 years, I poured my heart and soul into Henderson Marketing Solutions, working late nights, weekends, and holidays. I genuinely thought my boss, Marcus Henderson, saw me as more than just another employee. Boy, was I wrong about that. It all started on a Tuesday morning in March when I woke up with the most excruciating stomach pain I'd ever experienced. I'm talking about the kind of pain that makes you curl up in a ball and question every life choice you've ever made. The cramping was so intense that I could barely stand up straight, let alone drive to work. I'd been dealing with digestive issues for weeks, but this was different. This was debilitating. I called Marcus at 7:30 in the morning, about an hour before I was supposed to be in the office. My voice was strained as I explained the situation. Marcus, I'm really sorry, but I'm having severe stomach problems. I think I need to see a doctor today. I can try to work from home if you need me to handle anything urgent. His response was cold, almost mechanical. Raymond, we have the Pemberton presentation today. This is not the time to be calling in sick. There was no concern in his voice, no, I hope you feel better, or, take care of yourself. Just irritation that I was inconveniencing him. I understand the timing isn't ideal, I said, doubling over as another wave of pain hit me. But I can barely stand up right now. I've never called in sick unless it was absolutely necessary. And that was true. In 3 years, I could count my sick days on one hand. Marcus let out an exaggerated sigh. Fine, but this better not become a pattern. And I expect you to be available by phone if we need anything for the presentation. I agreed, hung up the phone, and immediately called my doctor's office. They managed to squeeze me in for an afternoon appointment, but the morning was pure agony. I spent most of it curled up on my bathroom floor, alternating between nausea and cramping. Every few hours, Marcus would call with urgent questions that could have easily waited or been handled by someone else. When I finally made it to Dr. Patricia Coleman's office, she took one look at me and ordered a battery of tests. Blood work, stool samples, the whole 9 yards. She suspected it could be anything from food poisoning to inflammatory bowel disease, and she wanted to rule out the serious stuff first. Raymond, you look terrible, she said with genuine concern, something I hadn't heard from my boss that morning. I'm writing you a note for the rest of the week. Your body needs time to recover, and stress will only make whatever this is worse. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief because I desperately needed the rest, and anxiety because I knew Marcus wouldn't be happy about this. When I called him that evening to explain the situation, his reaction was even worse than I'd anticipated. A whole week, he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. For stomach problems? Raymond, I'm disappointed. This is exactly the kind of thing that makes me question someone's commitment to this company. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut, and not just because my stomach was already in agony. After 3 years of dedication, of sacrificing my personal life for this job, he was questioning my commitment over a legitimate medical issue. I tried to explain that the doctor wanted to run tests, that she was concerned about potential serious conditions, but Marcus had already made up his mind. Just get better quickly, he said before hanging up. That night, lying in bed with a heating pad pressed against my stomach, I couldn't stop thinking about his reaction. This was the same man who had praised my work ethic countless times, who had relied on me to clean up other people's mistakes, who had called me his right-hand man. But the moment I needed understanding, he treated me like I was trying to scam him. The tests Dr. Coleman ran came back showing signs of severe gastritis and possible ulcers, likely stress-related. She prescribed medication and recommended significant dietary changes, emphasizing that stress was probably a major contributing factor. When she asked about my work environment, I found myself describing the long hours, the constant pressure, and Marcus's demanding nature. It sounds like your job might be making you physically ill, she said matter-of-factly. Have you considered that this might be your body's way of telling you something? I hadn't, but her words stuck with me throughout my recovery week. Every day, Marcus would send increasingly passive-aggressive emails about projects that were falling behind and deadlines that were at risk. He never once asked how I was feeling or if I needed anything. It was all about the work, all about how my absence was affecting him. By Friday, I was feeling significantly better physically, but emotionally, something had shifted. The rose-colored glasses I'd been wearing for 3 years had finally come off, and I was seeing Marcus and this job for what they really were. This wasn't a partnership or a family, it was a one-sided relationship where I gave everything and received nothing but demands in return. When I returned to work the following Monday, I was determined to have a conversation with Marcus about boundaries and mutual respect. I had no idea that conversation would change the trajectory of my entire life. Walking back into the office that Monday morning felt strange, like I was seeing everything through new eyes. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher, the cubicles more cramped, and the general atmosphere more oppressive than I remembered. Maybe it was because I'd had a week to step back and gain some perspective, or maybe it was because I was finally paying attention to things I'd been ignoring for 3 years. Marcus was in his office when I arrived, talking loudly on the phone about some client issue. I could see him through his glass door, gesticulating wildly and clearly agitated about something. I decided to give him a few minutes to finish his call before checking in. Sarah Mitchell, one of my colleagues, stopped by my desk with a concerned expression. "Raymond, how are you feeling? We were all worried about you last week." Her genuine concern was such a stark contrast to Marcus's reaction that it almost brought tears to my eyes. "Much better, thanks for asking," I said, settling into my chair. "Dr. Coleman thinks it was stress-related gastritis. She's got me on medication and a special diet for now." "Stress-related?" Sarah raised her eyebrows. "Well, that's not surprising considering how hard you've been working lately. Marcus had us all pulling double shifts while you were out, and he isn't exactly happy about it." Before I could respond, Marcus's office door swung open, and he strode out with that particular expression he wore when he was about to make someone's day miserable. "Raymond, my office. Now." The tone was sharp, authoritative, and completely lacking in any warmth or concern for my health. Sarah shot me a sympathetic look as I stood up and walked toward his office, my stomach already starting to tighten with familiar anxiety. Marcus closed the door behind me and didn't offer me a seat. Instead, he stood behind his desk, arms crossed, looking at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. "So, feeling better after your little vacation?" "Little vacation?" I felt my jaw clench, but I forced myself to stay calm. "It wasn't a vacation, Marcus. I was genuinely ill, and Dr. Coleman ran several tests to save it," he interrupted, holding up his hand. "Raymond, we need to talk about your commitment to this company. In the 3 years you've worked here, I've given you opportunities, promotions, and responsibilities that other people would kill for. And how do you repay that? By abandoning your team when we needed you most." I stared at him in disbelief. "I had a medical emergency. I provided a doctor's note. I was available by phone for urgent matters, which you took advantage of multiple times during my recovery." Marcus sat down heavily in his chair, never breaking eye contact. "Let me tell you something about the real world, Raymond. Companies don't succeed by coddling employees who can't handle a little pressure. If you can't manage your stress levels, maybe this isn't the right environment for you." The implication was clear, and it hit me like a slap across the face. After 3 years of exceptional performance reviews, of staying late to fix other people's mistakes, of missing family gatherings and personal milestones for this company, he was essentially threatening my job over 1 week of legitimate medical leave. "Are you saying my position is in jeopardy?" I asked, my voice carefully controlled despite the rage building inside me. Marcus leaned back in his chair with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm saying that I need employees I can count on. Employees who don't crumble under pressure. The Henderson family has built this company on reliability and dedication, and frankly, your recent behavior doesn't align with our values." Henderson family. That was rich. Marcus had inherited this business from his father, Thomas Henderson, who had actually built it from the ground up through hard work and treating employees with respect. I'd heard stories from longtime employees about how different Thomas had been, how he'd visit sick employees at the hospital, how he'd personally ensure everyone had Christmas bonuses, how he treated his staff like family. Marcus was nothing like his father, and everyone knew it. "I see," I said, standing up from the chair I'd finally claimed. "Well, I appreciate you being direct about your expectations. I'll make sure to keep that in mind moving forward." As I reached for the door handle, Marcus spoke again. "Oh, and Raymond. I'll need you to train Jessica Walsh on the Pemberton account. She'll be taking over as lead on that project." Jessica Walsh. The newest hire, barely out of college, with 6 months of experience compared to my 3 years of building relationships with that client. The Pemberton account that I'd landed, nurtured, and grown into one of our biggest revenue sources. He was stripping me of my most important project and handing it to someone who didn't even know the client's history. I turned back to face him, and for a moment, I saw something in his expression that looked almost like satisfaction. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying tearing me down, punishing me for being human, for having physical limitations, for needing medical care. "When do you need the transition completed?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "End of the week should be sufficient," he said, already turning his attention back to his computer screen. "And Raymond? Let's make sure we don't have any more health issues that interfere with your work responsibilities." I walked out of his office in a daze, feeling like I'd just been sucker punched by someone I'd trusted. The betrayal was so complete, so unexpected, that I actually felt physically sick again. 3 years of my life, 3 years of believing I was valued and respected, had just been revealed as a lie. Sarah was waiting by my desk when I returned, and one look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "That bad?" she whispered. "He's taking the Pemberton account away from me," I said, slumping into my chair. "Giving it to Jessica." "You're kidding me," Sarah said, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and looked around the office. "That's your account. You built that relationship from scratch." I nodded, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. Apparently, my recent behavior doesn't align with company values. For the rest of that day, I went through the motions of work while my mind raced with anger, hurt, and something else, something darker that I didn't want to acknowledge. By the time I left the office that evening, that darker feeling had a name: revenge. I'd always believed that good work and loyalty would be rewarded, that treating people fairly was just basic human decency. But Marcus had shown me that he saw those qualities as weaknesses to exploit rather than strengths to appreciate. As I drove home that night, Dr. Coleman's words echoed in my mind: "It sounds like your job might be making you physically ill. Have you considered that this might be your body's way of telling you something? Maybe it was time to listen to what my body and my instincts were trying to tell me." That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my laptop screen and thinking about everything that had transpired. The medication Dr. Coleman had prescribed was helping with my stomach issues, but nothing could ease the burning sense of injustice that had settled in my chest. I kept replaying Marcus's words, his dismissive tone, that satisfied smirk when he told me about reassigning the Pemberton account. I'd given this company everything. I'd missed my brother David's wedding rehearsal for a client emergency. I'd skipped my mother's birthday dinner to finish a presentation that could have easily waited until Monday. I'd turned down dates, cancelled weekend plans, and essentially put my entire personal life on hold to be the reliable employee Marcus claimed he needed. And for what? To be treated like a liability the moment I showed human vulnerability? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. But this wasn't the hot, explosive anger that makes you do stupid things. This was cold, calculating fury that demanded justice. Marcus had shown me exactly who he was, and now I was going to show him who I could be. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember about my tenure at Henderson Marketing Solutions. Every late night I'd worked, every weekend I'd sacrificed, every time I'd gone above and beyond the call of duty. I also started making notes about Marcus's behavior, his treatment of other employees, his questionable business practices, his habit of taking credit for other people's work. As I wrote, patterns began to emerge. Marcus had a history of pushing out employees who showed any sign of independence or strength. 2 years ago, he'd forced out Amanda Torres, a brilliant account manager who dared to question his strategy on a major campaign. Last year, it was Michael Chen, a creative director who'd won awards for his work but had the audacity to ask for a raise. Both had been systematically undermined before being pushed to quit. I realized I wasn't his first victim, I was just the latest in a long line of talented people he discarded when they became inconvenient or threatening to his ego. The next few days at work were surreal. I maintained a professional demeanor while training Jessica on the Pemberton account, but inside, I was observing everything with new eyes. I watched Marcus interact with clients, noting how he took credit for ideas that had originated with his staff. I observed his treatment of newer employees, seeing how he alternated between false charm and subtle intimidation. I paid attention to his schedule, his habits, his routines. Knowledge, I'd learned a long time ago, was power. And I was accumulating a lot of knowledge about Marcus Henderson. On Wednesday, something interesting happened. I was in the break room getting coffee when I overheard Thomas Henderson, Marcus's father and the company's founder, talking to his longtime secretary, Eleanor Price. Thomas still came into the office occasionally, though he'd officially retired 5 years ago. "Eleanor, I'm concerned about the employee turnover," Thomas was saying, his voice heavy with worry. "We've lost some exceptional people in the past couple of years. Amanda Torres, Michael Chen, and now I'm hearing rumors about other good employees being unhappy." Eleanor glanced around nervously before responding. "Mr. Henderson, I probably shouldn't say anything, but, well, Marcus has a very different management style than you did. Some of the employees have mentioned feeling undervalued and overworked." Thomas sighed deeply. "My father built this company on the principle that employees are family. I tried to maintain that tradition, but I'm worried that Marcus..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I just want what's best for the company and the people who work here." I stayed in the break room longer than necessary, pretending to read emails on my phone while I processed what I'd just heard. Thomas Henderson wasn't just the founder, he was still a significant shareholder in the company. More importantly, he clearly cared about the employees and was already concerned about his son's leadership style. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my college roommate, Jake Morrison, who now worked as a corporate headhunter in Chicago. Jake had been trying to recruit me for various positions over the years, but I'd always turned him down out of loyalty to Henderson Marketing. "Raymond." Jake's voice boomed through the phone. "Please tell me you're finally ready to leave that place and make some real money." "Actually, Jake, I think I might be," I said, settling into my couch. "But I need to ask you about something specific. Have you ever heard anything about Henderson Marketing Solutions in your professional circles?" There was a pause. "Funny you should ask. I've actually had several people approach me about opportunities there over the past year, but when I did my usual background research, well, let's just say the feedback about current management wasn't great. Word in the industry is that Marcus Henderson is burning through talent pretty quickly. What kind of reputation does that give a company?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Not a good one," Jake said bluntly. "Clients start to notice when good people keep leaving. It makes them question the stability and quality of the agency." "Why are you asking? Are you thinking about making a move?" "Maybe," I said. "But Jake, if I were to leave Henderson Marketing, hypothetically speaking, what kind of opportunities might be available?" We talked for another hour, and by the time I hung up, I had a much clearer picture of my options. More importantly, I had the beginnings of a plan that would give Marcus Henderson exactly what he deserved. The next morning, I came into work with a different attitude. I was still professional, still doing my job, but I was no longer the eager-to-please employee who stayed late and went above and beyond. I did exactly what was required and nothing more. When Marcus asked me to work late on Thursday, I politely declined, citing a doctor's appointment for my ongoing stomach issues. "I hope this isn't going to be a recurring problem," Marcus said with barely concealed irritation. "Just following doctor's orders," I replied with a smile. She was very clear about the importance of managing stress levels. I could see the frustration in his eyes, but there was nothing he could say. After all, he couldn't very well tell me to ignore medical advice after making such a big deal about my health issues the week before. That weekend, I spent time crafting what I privately called Operation Farewell. It wasn't just about getting back at Marcus, though that was certainly part of it. It was about exposing the truth about his management style and hopefully preventing other good employees from going through what I'd experienced. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus prided himself on his relationships with clients and his reputation in the industry. He also had a massive ego that couldn't tolerate being embarrassed or shown up by someone he considered beneath him. I was going to use both of those traits against him. By Sunday night, I had all the pieces in place. Monday would begin the final phase of my employment at Henderson Marketing Solutions, though Marcus would have no idea what was coming until it was too late. As I prepared for bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: genuine excitement about going to work. Not because I loved the job anymore, but because I was finally going to take control of my situation and show Marcus Henderson that loyalty and respect were earned, not demanded. The student was about to become the teacher, and it was going to be a lesson Marcus would never forget. Part 4, Setting the Stage. Monday morning arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation. I dressed carefully, choosing my best suit not because I wanted to impress Marcus, but because I wanted to look professional and confident for what was about to unfold. As I drove to the office, I reviewed my plan one more time, making sure every detail was in place. The first step was subtly documenting Marcus's behavior and creating a paper trail that couldn't be disputed later. I'd already started this process, but now I needed to be more systematic about it. Every interaction, every dismissive comment, every instance of him taking credit for someone else's work needed to be recorded. I arrived at the office early and settled into my routine, but with new purpose. When Marcus called me into his office for our usual Monday morning briefing, I was ready. "How are we looking on the transition with Jessica?" he asked, not bothering to look up from his computer. "She's picking things up quickly," I replied, pulling out my notepad. "I've documented all the client preferences, project history, and ongoing initiatives. She should be fully up to speed by Wednesday." Marcus finally looked up, and I could see a flicker of surprise at my efficiency. He'd probably expected me to drag out the process or make it difficult somehow. Good. That's good. I've also prepared a comprehensive report on the account's performance metrics, revenue projections, and growth opportunities, I continued. I thought it might be helpful for Jessica to have all that information in one place. "Right," Marcus said, clearly trying to figure out why I was being so cooperative. "Well, I appreciate your professionalism about this transition." "Of course," I said with a genuine smile. "After all, what's best for the client is what's best for the company." Over the next few days, I maintained this level of helpful professionalism while quietly executing the other parts of my plan. During lunch breaks, I began reaching out to contacts at other agencies, not to job hunt directly, but to have casual conversations about industry trends and client relationships. These conversations were enlightening. I learned that several of Henderson Marketing's former clients had been less than satisfied with the service they'd received after key account managers left. I also discovered that our biggest competitor, Creative Solutions Group, had been quietly approaching some of our clients with better offers and more experienced teams. Wednesday brought an unexpected opportunity. Marcus was scheduled to have lunch with Robert Pemberton, the CEO of our biggest client, to discuss expanding their contract. This was the same account he'd just stripped away from me and given to Jessica, who had barely been briefed on the client's complex needs and history. That morning, Marcus called Jessica into his office for what I assumed was a last-minute prep session for the lunch meeting. From my desk, I could hear raised voices, and when Jessica emerged 20 minutes later, her face was flushed and she looked near tears. "Everything okay?" I asked quietly as she passed my desk. She glanced toward Marcus's office and then leaned closer to me. He's furious because I don't know all the details about the Pemberton account's history. He's blaming me for not being prepared, but Raymond, we've only had 3 days to transition everything, and there are 3 years' worth of relationship building that I couldn't possibly absorb that quickly. I felt genuinely sorry for Jessica. She was a bright, hard-working person who was being set up to fail by Marcus's impulsive decision-making. Would it help if I joined the lunch meeting? I offered. Just to provide background support and ensure continuity for the client. Jessica's eyes lit up with relief. Would you? I know it's awkward given the circumstances, but I'm terrified I'm going to lose this account on my first major client interaction. Let me talk to Marcus, I said, already standing up. I knocked on Marcus's office door and waited for his grudging invitation to enter. He was pacing behind his desk, clearly agitated about the upcoming lunch meeting. Marcus, Jessica mentioned she's concerned about having enough background on the Pemberton account for today's lunch, I began diplomatically. Since I built the relationship with Robert over the past 3 years, I thought I might join you both to ensure a smooth transition and provide any historical context that might be helpful. Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. I could see him weighing his options. His pride wanted to reject my offer after all, he'd made a big show of taking this account away from me. But his practical side knew that losing the Pemberton account would be a disaster for the company and his reputation. Fine, he said finally. But you're there as backup support only. Jessica is the lead on this account now, and I don't want you undermining her authority with the client. Absolutely, I agreed. I'm just there to help ensure continuity and answer any detailed questions about past campaigns or initiatives. The lunch meeting was at Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant that Marcus favored for client entertainment. Robert Pemberton was already seated when we arrived, looking relaxed and genuinely happy to see me. Raymond. Robert stood up to shake my hand warmly. How are you feeling? Marcus mentioned you'd been under the weather last week. Much better, thank you for asking, I replied, noting that Marcus looked uncomfortable with the warm greeting I received. As we settled into our seats, Marcus began his usual charm offensive, but I could tell Robert was more interested in talking to me about the account's performance and future strategies. Jessica, to her credit, was taking detailed notes and asking thoughtful questions, but it was clear that Robert saw me as his primary point of contact. Halfway through the meal, Robert made a comment that changed everything. You know, Marcus, I have to say that Raymond's personal attention to our account has been exceptional. He really understands our brand and our goals in a way that's rare in this industry. I was actually going to suggest that we increase our contract scope for next year. Marcus's eyes lit up at the mention of increasing the contract scope, but Robert continued, of course, that would depend on maintaining the same level of personal service and expertise we've come to expect. Raymond's strategic insights have been invaluable to our success. I could see Marcus struggling with how to respond. He couldn't very well explain that he'd just stripped the account away from me without making it look like poor management. Jessica looked mortified, realizing that the client clearly preferred working with me over her. Well, Marcus said carefully, we're always committed to providing the best possible service to our clients. Raymond will certainly continue to be involved in strategic discussions. Robert looked confused. Continue to be involved? I thought Raymond was our primary account manager. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face had gone slightly red, and I could see him trying to figure out how to handle this situation without losing face or losing the client. Finally, I spoke up. There have been some recent changes in account assignments, I said diplomatically. Jessica is taking on a larger role with your account, which will give you access to fresh perspectives while maintaining the strategic continuity you value. Robert looked from Jessica to Marcus to me, clearly trying to understand the dynamics at play. I see, he said slowly. Well, I suppose as long as the quality of service remains high, I'm open to working with the team. The rest of the lunch was tense, with Marcus clearly struggling to regain control of the conversation and Robert seeming less enthusiastic about the proposed contract expansion. When we finally returned to the office, Marcus was barely containing his anger. "My office. Now," he said to me the moment we walked through the door. This was it. This was the moment I'd been preparing for all week. As I followed Marcus into his office, I felt a calm certainty settle over me. The next few minutes were going to determine the trajectory of both our futures, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I held all the cards. Marcus slammed his office door behind me with enough force to rattle the glass walls. His face was flushed red, and I could see a vein pulsing in his temple, never a good sign with Marcus. He stood behind his desk, gripping the back of his chair so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. "What the hell was that performance in there?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "You completely undermined Jessica and made me look like I don't know how to manage my own accounts." I remained standing calmly in front of his desk, my hands clasped behind my back. "I'm not sure what you mean, Marcus. I provided support to ensure client satisfaction, exactly as we discussed." "Don't play games with me, Raymond," he snarled. "You knew damn well that Robert Pemberton would react that way. You've been filling his head with ideas about your supposed expertise for 3 years, making him dependent on you specifically instead of the company." Now we were getting to the heart of it. Marcus wasn't angry about the lunch meeting going poorly, he was angry that it had exposed his own poor judgment in reassigning the account. More than that, he was angry that Robert Pemberton saw me as valuable, perhaps more valuable than Marcus himself. "I've always focused on what's best for the client and the company," I said evenly. "If that created strong relationships, isn't that exactly what we want in client services?" Marcus walked around his desk, moving closer to me in what I recognized as an intimidation tactic. "Let me make something crystal clear to you, Raymond. I own this company. I make the decisions about who handles what accounts, and I don't need some employee getting too big for his britches and thinking he's indispensable." "I never claimed to be indispensable," I replied, maintaining my calm tone despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "In fact, I think today proved that account transitions can be challenging, which is why most companies handle them more gradually." "Are you questioning my judgment?" Marcus's voice had risen to just below a shout. "I'm simply observing that Robert Pemberton seemed surprised by the change, which suggests the communication could have been handled differently." That was it. That was the moment Marcus lost whatever remaining control he had over his temper. His face went from red to purple, and when he spoke, flecks of saliva flew from his mouth. "You arrogant piece of garbage," he hissed. "You think you're so smart, so important. Well, let me tell you something, you're nothing. You're a mid-level employee at a company I own, and if you don't like how I run things, you can get the hell out." The mask had finally come off completely. This was the real Marcus Henderson, not the smooth-talking businessman he presented to clients, not the concerned boss he pretended to be during performance reviews. This was a petty, insecure man who couldn't handle having his authority questioned in any way. "Is that a termination, Marcus?" I asked quietly. He paused, realizing that he'd let his anger push him further than he'd intended. Firing me immediately after the lunch meeting would raise questions, especially if Robert Pemberton called looking for me specifically. "It's a warning," he said, trying to regain his composure. "A final warning. Step out of line again, and you're gone. And from now on, you don't go to any client meetings without my explicit approval. You don't communicate with clients directly. You do the work Jessica assigns to you, and you keep your mouth shut." I nodded slowly, as if I was absorbing his demands. "I understand. You want me to step back from client-facing activities." "That's right," Marcus said, sitting down heavily in his chair. "You're going to learn your place in this organization, one way or another." "Actually, Marcus," I said, finally allowing a small smile to cross my face, "I think I already know my place." Something in my tone must have alerted him because his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What's that supposed to mean?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is my 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. My last day will be Friday, October 15th. The color drained from Marcus's face as he stared at the letter I'd placed on his desk. You're quitting. I'm resigning, I corrected. After careful consideration, I've decided that you're right, this isn't the right environment for me. I've accepted a position with Creative Solutions Group as their new senior account director. Creative Solutions Group. Henderson Marketing's biggest competitor. The company that had been quietly poaching our clients. Marcus's mouth fell open as the implications hit him. You can't do this, he said weakly. You have a non-compete clause in your contract. I'd been waiting for him to bring that up. Actually, I had our family attorney review my contract last week. The non-compete clause is unenforceable in this state unless the employer provides additional compensation during the restricted period, which Henderson Marketing has never done. More importantly, the clause doesn't apply if the employee is terminated for cause or constructively dismissed. Constructively dismissed. Marcus looked confused. It's a legal term, I explained helpfully. It refers to situations where an employer makes working conditions so intolerable that a reasonable person would feel compelled to resign. Stripping away major responsibilities, questioning someone's commitment after legitimate medical leave, creating a hostile work environment, those all qualify as constructive dismissal. Marcus was now staring at me with a combination of fury and something that might have been respect. He was finally realizing that I wasn't the pushover he'd thought I was. Furthermore, I continued, Creative Solutions Group has offered me a position that doesn't involve any Henderson Marketing clients initially, so there's no conflict of interest. Of course, if any clients specifically request to work with me in the future. I shrugged. Well, that would be their choice. Robert Pemberton, Marcus said quietly, the pieces finally falling into place. Robert Pemberton is a smart businessman who values relationships and results, I said. I'm sure he'll make whatever decision he thinks is best for his company. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair rolling back and hitting the window behind his desk. You planned this. This whole thing was planned. I planned to resign professionally and transition my responsibilities to ensure minimal disruption to the company and our clients, I said truthfully. What happens after that is really up to you and how you choose to handle the situation. Get out, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Just get out of my office. I picked up my resignation letter from his desk and handed it back to him. You'll want to keep this for HR purposes. I've already sent a copy to Eleanor and provided a detailed transition plan for all my current projects. As I reached the door, I turned back one more time. Oh, and Marcus. You might want to think about how you're going to explain this to your father. I have a feeling Thomas Henderson won't be happy to hear that another good employee has decided to leave. I walked out of his office, closing the door gently behind me, and headed back to my desk to begin the process of packing up 3 years of my professional life. Around the office, I could see people glancing curiously in my direction, sensing that something significant had just happened but not sure what. Sarah Mitchell appeared at my desk within minutes, her eyes wide with concern. Raymond, what's going on? Marcus looks like he's about to have a stroke. I looked toward his office, where I could see Marcus pacing frantically while talking on the phone. I just gave my notice, Sarah. My last day is next Friday. You're quitting, she gasped. I'm resigning, I said, starting to clear out my desk drawers. I've accepted a position elsewhere. Sarah looked stunned. But, why? I mean, I know Marcus has been difficult lately, but... I paused in my packing and looked at her directly. Sarah, how many good people have we lost in the past 2 years? Amanda, Michael, David Kim from accounting, Lisa Rodriguez from creative, the list keeps growing. At some point, you have to ask yourself if the problem is with the employees or with the management. She was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said. Finally, she nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same thing lately. Ever since you got back from sick leave, actually. The way Marcus handled that situation. She trailed off, shaking her head. Word spread quickly through the office, and over the next hour, I had a steady stream of colleagues stopping by my desk to express their shock and disappointment. What struck me most was how many of them seemed envious rather than surprised. Marcus had created an environment where good employees leaving wasn't shocking, it was expected. Around 3 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Robert Pemberton. "Raymond, I hope you don't mind me calling you directly," he said, "but I wanted to follow up on our lunch today. I got the distinct impression that there were some internal changes happening that might affect our working relationship." I glanced toward Marcus's office, where I could see him still pacing and gesticulating wildly on what appeared to be another heated phone call. "Robert, I appreciate you reaching out. I actually just submitted my resignation this afternoon. My last day with Henderson Marketing will be next Friday." There was a long pause. "I see. May I ask where you're going?" "Creative Solutions Group has offered me a senior position. I start there the following Monday." Another pause, longer this time. "Raymond, I want to be direct with you. Your strategic insights and personal attention have been crucial to our success over the past 3 years. Henderson Marketing is a good agency, but you've been the primary reason we've been so satisfied with their service. I appreciate that, Robert. It's been a genuine pleasure working with you and your team." "The feeling is mutual," he said. "Listen, I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but I think we need to seriously reconsider our relationship with Henderson Marketing if you're not going to be involved in our account." This was exactly what I'd hoped might happen, though I was careful not to seem like I was soliciting anything. "That's completely your decision, Robert. Jessica Walsh is very capable, and I'm sure she'll do her best to maintain the level of service you expect." "I'm sure she will," Robert said diplomatically. "But 3 years of relationship building isn't something you can transfer in a few days. I think we need to have some serious discussions about our contract renewal." After I hung up, I noticed Marcus watching me from his office with a look of pure hatred. He'd probably guessed who I was talking to, and he undoubtedly knew that this conversation could spell disaster for the agency. The rest of the week passed in a strange blur. Word of my departure had spread beyond the office, and I received calls from several other clients expressing concern about the change. Each conversation was professional and cordial, but the message was clear: my departure was going to have significant implications for Henderson Marketing's client relationships. Marcus barely spoke to me during my final days, communicating only through terse emails about transition requirements. But I could see the stress was eating at him. His usually perfect appearance was becoming disheveled, and according to Sarah, he'd been staying in the office until nearly midnight every night, frantically trying to shore up client relationships. On Thursday, Thomas Henderson made an unexpected visit to the office. I saw him talking quietly with Eleanor Price, and both of them kept glancing in Marcus's direction with concerned expressions. Later that afternoon, I spotted Thomas in the break room and decided to take a chance. "Mr. Henderson," I said, approaching him respectfully. "I wanted to thank you for the opportunities you've given me here. This has been a valuable experience." Thomas looked up from his coffee with sad, tired eyes. "Raymond, I heard you're leaving us. I have to say, I'm disappointed to see another good employee go." "Sometimes change is necessary for growth," I said diplomatically. He nodded slowly. "My father always told me that a company is only as good as its people. When good people start leaving, it's usually a sign that something needs to change." He paused, studying my face. "I hope you find what you're looking for at Creative Solutions." "Thank you, sir. I believe I will." That evening, as I was finishing up some final documentation at my desk, Marcus's office door opened and he walked out with a determined stride. For a moment, I thought he might be coming to speak with me, but instead, he headed straight for the exit without looking in my direction. Sarah, who had been working late as well, came over to my desk. "He's been in meetings with his father and Eleanor all afternoon," she whispered. "Whatever's happening, it's big." I had a feeling I knew exactly what was happening, but I kept that to myself. Instead, I focused on finishing my transition documents and preparing for my final day tomorrow. As I packed up the last of my personal items, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 2 weeks. The sick leave that Marcus had treated as such an inconvenience had actually been a blessing in disguise. It had given me the perspective I needed to see my situation clearly and the motivation to finally take action. Tomorrow would be my last day at Henderson Marketing Solutions, but something told me that the real consequences of Marcus's treatment were just beginning to unfold. Friday morning arrived with an unusual energy in the office. Word had somehow gotten out that Thomas Henderson was planning to make some kind of announcement, and everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells. Marcus looked haggard and seemed to be avoiding eye contact with everyone, including me. I spent the morning completing my final transition tasks and having brief meetings with colleagues to ensure smooth handovers of ongoing projects. The atmosphere was strange, part farewell party, part funeral. People seemed genuinely sad to see me go, but there was also an underlying tension that had nothing to do with my departure. Around 11 o'clock, Eleanor Price approached my desk with an envelope. "Raymond, this is your final paycheck and accrued vacation time," she said quietly. "I also wanted to personally thank you for your professionalism during this transition. It hasn't gone unnoticed." There was something in her tone that suggested she was referring to more than just my resignation process, but I didn't probe. Eleanor had been with the company since Thomas Henderson's days, and she'd seen everything that had happened over the years. "Thank you, Eleanor. I've really valued working with you." She glanced toward Marcus's office and then back to me. "Raymond, I hope you know that not everyone here agrees with certain recent decisions. Some of us remember what this company used to stand for." Before I could respond, she walked away, leaving me to wonder exactly what conversations had been taking place behind closed doors. At noon, I was surprised to receive a call from Jake Morrison, my headhunter friend in Chicago. "Raymond, I just got off the phone with Patricia Wells at Creative Solutions Group. She wanted me to pass along that they're thrilled to have you joining the team, and they've already had 3 client inquiries about your availability." 3 client inquiries? Already? Jake chuckled. "Word travels fast in this industry, my friend. When someone with your track record becomes available, people take notice." Patricia mentioned that one of the inquiries was from a company called Pemberton Industries. Ring a bell? I smiled despite myself. "You could say that. Well, whatever you did at Henderson Marketing, it made an impression. Patricia says they're looking forward to having someone with your client relationship skills on their team." After hanging up with Jake, I realized that my plan was working even better than I'd hoped. By treating me poorly and forcing my resignation, Marcus had inadvertently set in motion a series of events that would have far-reaching consequences for his business. At 1 o'clock, just as I was preparing to leave for the day, Thomas Henderson emerged from Marcus's office with an expression I'd never seen before, disappointment mixed with determination. He walked to the center of the office and cleared his throat. "Could everyone gather around for a moment?" he called out. "I have an announcement to make." The entire office fell silent as people emerged from their cubicles and offices to form a loose circle around Thomas. Marcus remained in his office doorway, his face pale and drawn. "As many of you know, I founded this company 42 years ago on the principle that our employees are our greatest asset," Thomas began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built something from nothing. "My father taught me that how you treat people matters more than short-term profits, and that philosophy has guided this company through 4 decades of growth and success." I could see people exchanging glances, sensing that something significant was about to be announced. "However," Thomas continued, "it's recently come to my attention that we've lost sight of those founding principles. When good employees leave, it's often a reflection of leadership failure, not employee inadequacy. When client relationships suffer because of internal turmoil, it's a sign that management priorities need to be reevaluated." Marcus stepped forward from his office doorway. "Dad, maybe this isn't the appropriate venue for..." Thomas held up his hand, silencing his son with a look that could have melted steel. "Marcus, you've had your chance to lead this company according to your vision. The results speak for themselves. The silence in the office was deafening. I could feel the collective held breath of 30 employees who had never seen Thomas Henderson speak to his son this way in public. Effective immediately, Thomas announced, "I'm resuming active management of Henderson Marketing Solutions." Marcus will be taking an extended leave of absence to reassess his career goals. The shock rippled through the room like a physical wave. Several people actually gasped audibly, and I saw Sarah's hand fly to her mouth in surprise. Marcus looked like he'd been physically struck. Furthermore, Thomas continued, "I'll be reaching out personally to clients and former employees to rebuild the relationships and trust that have been damaged. This company will return to the values that made it successful in the first place." Thomas looked directly at me then, and I saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. "Raymond, I know today is your last day, but if you'd be willing to postpone your start date at Creative Solutions by a few weeks, I'd like to discuss the possibility of you staying on to help with this transition." The entire office turned to look at me, including Marcus, whose expression had gone from shock to something approaching panic. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for all week, though I hadn't realized it until now. I took a deep breath and considered my options. Creative Solutions Group was expecting me, and I'd already made commitments there. But Thomas Henderson was offering me something Marcus never had: respect, acknowledgement, and the opportunity to be part of rebuilding something worthwhile. "Mr. Henderson," I said carefully, "I appreciate the offer more than you know. However, I've already made commitments to Creative Solutions Group, and I believe it's important to honor those commitments." Thomas nodded slowly, clearly disappointed but understanding. "I respect that, Raymond. A man is only as good as his word. However," I continued, "I'd be happy to serve as a consultant during the transition period to help rebuild client relationships and ensure continuity on key accounts." Thomas's face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. "That would be incredibly helpful. We'll work out the details this afternoon." As the crowd began to disperse, I caught sight of Marcus still standing in his office doorway, looking completely lost. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I actually felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy. He'd brought this on himself through his arrogance and poor treatment of people, but seeing him publicly stripped of authority by his own father was still difficult to watch. Later that afternoon, I sat in the conference room with Thomas Henderson, Eleanor Price, and 2 members of the company's board of directors, working out the details of my consulting arrangement. It was surreal. 24 hours ago, I'd been persona non grata in Marcus's eyes, and now I was being asked to help save the company. "Raymond," Thomas said as we wrapped up the meeting, "I want you to know that I take full responsibility for what happened here. I should have been more involved in day-to-day operations. I should have listened when employees started leaving. Most importantly, I should have addressed the management issues before they reached this point." "Mr. Henderson, you built something special here," I replied. "Companies go through difficult periods, but the foundation you laid is still solid. With the right leadership, Henderson Marketing can absolutely recover from this." As I finally left the office that evening, carrying a box of my personal items and a consulting contract that would keep me connected to the company for the next 3 months, I reflected on the strange turn my plan for revenge had taken. I'd wanted Marcus to face consequences for his behavior, and he certainly had more severe consequences than I'd ever imagined possible. But seeing his father's disappointment and the impact on the entire organization made me realize that revenge, even justified revenge, rarely unfolds the way you expect it to. The real victory wasn't in Marcus's downfall, it was in the opportunity to help rebuild something better from the ashes of his poor leadership. 3 months later, I sat in my new office at Creative Solutions Group, reviewing the final report I prepared for Thomas Henderson. The consulting arrangement had been more rewarding than I'd anticipated, helping to rebuild client relationships and establish new management protocols at Henderson Marketing Solutions. The transformation had been remarkable. Under Thomas's renewed leadership, employee morale had improved dramatically, and several former employees had even returned to the company. Most importantly, client confidence had been restored, with Pemberton Industries ultimately deciding to expand their contract rather than leave for a competitor. Marcus, meanwhile, had taken his extended leave of absence and relocated to California, where he'd started a small digital marketing firm. According to industry gossip, he was struggling to attract clients and had difficulty keeping employees. The professional network he'd taken for granted in his father's company proved to be less portable than he'd assumed. I'd seen him once, about 6 weeks after leaving Henderson Marketing. I was having lunch at Romano's, the same restaurant where the fateful client meeting had taken place, when he walked in with someone I didn't recognize. He looked older, more worn down, and when our eyes met across the restaurant, I saw something I'd never expected to see from Marcus Henderson: shame. He approached my table hesitantly, as if unsure whether I'd even acknowledge him. "Raymond," he said quietly, "I hope you don't mind me interrupting your lunch." "Not at all," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Please, sit down." Marcus sat down awkwardly, fidgeting with his napkin. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up and met my eyes directly. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The way I treated you, especially when you were ill, it was inexcusable. You gave 3 years of your life to that company, and I threw it away because of my own insecurities and ego." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all I saw was genuine remorse. "Marcus, I appreciate you saying that. It means more than you probably realize. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened," he continued. "About the kind of leader I was, the kind of person I became. My father built that company on principles of respect and fairness, and I turned it into something he barely recognized." "People make mistakes," I said diplomatically. "The important thing is learning from them." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Learning from them? Yes, well, I've certainly had plenty of opportunities for that lately. Do you know what the hardest part has been? It wasn't losing the company or having to start over. It was seeing the disappointment in my father's eyes and knowing that I'd betrayed everything he'd worked to build." We talked for another 20 minutes, and I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected: forgiveness. Not because Marcus deserved it, but because holding on to anger and resentment was exhausting. He'd faced consequences for his actions, severe, life-altering consequences, and continuing to harbor hatred served no purpose. As he prepared to leave, Marcus stood up and extended his hand. "Raymond, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you might be able to think of me as something other than the worst boss you ever had." I shook his hand firmly. "Marcus, I hope you find what you're looking for in California. Everyone deserves a second chance to become the person they want to be." After he left, I sat alone at the table, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months ago, I'd been a loyal employee who believed that hard work and dedication would always be rewarded. The betrayal I'd experienced had shattered that naive belief, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself and recognizing my own worth. The plan for revenge that had started as cold calculation had evolved into something more complex and ultimately more satisfying. Marcus had faced consequences, but the real victory was in the positive changes that had followed at Henderson Marketing, in my own career, and even, apparently, in Marcus's understanding of himself. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Mitchell, who had been promoted to senior account manager under Thomas's new regime. "Just wanted to let you know that we landed the Morrison Industries account today. Jessica did an amazing presentation, and Thomas made sure to mention your role in training her. The whole team sends their thanks for everything you did during the transition." I smiled, feeling a warm sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with helping good people succeed. The original plan had been about making Marcus pay for his betrayal, but the real reward had been in rebuilding something better from the damage he'd caused. That evening, as I drove home from my new job, a position I genuinely loved at a company that valued its employees, I reflected on the lessons learned from this entire experience. Revenge, I discovered, was most satisfying when it transformed into something constructive rather than destructive. Marcus Henderson had taught me, through his negative example, the kind of leader and person I never wanted to become. But more importantly, Thomas Henderson had shown me that it's never too late to return to your core values and rebuild trust with the people who matter. The sick leave that had started this whole chain of events had indeed been my body's way of telling me something important. Not just that I was stressed and overworked, but that I deserved better treatment and had the power to demand it. 6 months later, I was healthier, happier, and more successful than I'd ever been. Marcus had inadvertently done me the greatest favor of my professional life by showing his true colors and forcing me to recognize my own value. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and helping others do the same. Marcus Henderson had given me that gift, even if he'd never intended to. And for that, surprisingly enough, I was almost grateful.